Let's move on now, shall we? It's time for the Future Politics Panel.
The Future Politics Panel.
Yes, I'm delighted to say that joining us this morning, Lettice Bromovsky, political commentator, and Grace Vadamosi, political commentator, who's run in hot foot. Well done. You made it. I was very worried where you were. But anyway, you've made it. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
You both well?
Yeah, very well.
Good. Let's start, shall we, with this big story, which is the Sunday Telegraph, which I just find an absolutely priceless headline. Gove, net zero can't become a crusade. This is Michael Gove. He's warned against treating the environment as a religious crusade, and then goes on to call for a relaxation of some of the net zero measures. Now, he is the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary. He said this inflexible application of rules designed to reduce pollution leads to a backlash. This is a hallelujah moment, I think. Do you not, Lettice?
I think that this has come at a moment when we've got to think of what's going on in politics right now, particularly with the Uxbridge by-election which happened, and everyone's very shocked by the result of it. And essentially...
Are they?
I think they are. They are very much, because they won, and it was said even by Steve Tuckwell, on the back of a referendum on ULEZ. So everyone's been like now, oh, if the Conservatives can win being anti-ULEZ, which is now being seen as a pillar of anti-green and anti-net zero policies, then perhaps we can win more votes. So this I see as a sort of politically motivated move to see and just sort of show voters that we will be the party of consideration when it comes to net zero policies.
But hang on a minute, this is enormously ironic. This is the party that's imposed all of these targets.
Well, yeah, that might be true, and we can't forget that he was the Environment Secretary, but he's not saying get rid of them. He's just saying we might relax them, which I think is a smart move. There are times when people are struggling. I'm not thinking that we should get rid of them completely, but people are struggling now more than ever. Cost of living, war in Ukraine, inflation rising. There are so many other extenuating circumstances that mean people can't afford this.
No, I agree.
So relaxing measures...
I totally agree. I mean, then you've got Ian Duncan-Smith wading in as well. Ian Duncan-Smith has now also said we need to rethink net zero in light of the by-election results. He said voters are angry. What a surprise. The target of reducing net greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050 had led to arbitrary and very costly deadlines, such as the 2030 ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars. Do you think, Grace, this is a watershed moment where finally, possibly, politicians are now listening to the electorate who've been banging on about this for a very long time?
Well, my views on net zero, firstly, are no surprise to them, anymore. But I would say is that the government are actually listening to people. But I think there needs to be a distinction between being anti-ULEZ and being anti-net zero and anti-green, because they're not quite the same thing. You know, what we had with the ULEZ was a very top-down kind of heavy measure saying this is going to be imposed, whereas my vision of net zero and what I hope the government's vision of net zero is something that's pro-growth, you know, that can generate jobs in the economy as well as also being environmentally friendly. So, I mean, what we've seen is a clear rejection of the ULEZ style of things, but that doesn't mean we need to be done with it.
So what about the time frame, though? So just talk us through what your vision is of net zero.
Yeah, well, my vision of net zero is essentially obviously being environmentally friendly and all of that, but also it being the key mechanism for growth that we need in the UK economy, because we're severely lacking. And as we move into the next, decade or two, we need a new sort of industry, if you will, that can create the drive that we need in the economy, and I think that's going to be net zero.
Do you? How is that going to grow the economy?
Well, when you need to start building new, infrastructure that is more compliant, when you start needing to build, new buildings that's more compliant, all of these things are going to create jobs as well as making it...
Doesn't that come at a massive cost? Also, we've heard a lot about the national grid. It's all very well building wind farms, for example, but if you can't connect them to the grid... Yeah. Doesn't that just burden people?
I think the main thing that we've learnt from ULEZ is that net zero needs to be done in consultation with the people. Because, again, people's attitudes to net zero aren't necessarily the problem. It's the fact that the government isn't listening to what exactly it is that people want.
Well, I think I can't disagree with anything you say, Grace, because that sounds like a really sensible idea. But I think what you're ignoring in all of this is nobody is actually saying to people, well, are you happy to have power cuts? Are you happy that it's going to cost you £15,000 to insulate your home and have another £20,000 to have a heat pump? And people have had no choice about the levies that have gone onto their energy bills. So there's a lot to unpick in here that is costing people. It's all very well talking about growth.
No, I think that's the key thing. That's the key thing is about choice. With the ULEZ that we're talking about, is that people didn't have a choice.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
So when
but
you
then
give
people don't, because of course the environmental levies that you are given as a householder, you have no choice. Also, the price of electricity is pegged to the price of gas, which I've never understood. Is this, let me just ask you, Lettice, is this a very smart political move? So if, let's just say, the Labour Party is far too far down the road of net zero, I think, to return from that. If the Conservative Party pivot, and I will mention this, Reform UK has said for a very long time that we need to ditch this target of net zero, and the Conservative Party is now obviously pivoting towards this. Is this an incredibly smart political move to regain all of the red wall, to regain all of those people who thought, right, I'm not voting Tory anymore?
I don't think this individual move will regain all of those votes. Too much has happened over the last few years. Too much has changed. Too much has been, seen and done. But I do think that this might be a way for them to connect back with the voters. In a way, they've been incredibly disconnected up to this point, and people feel completely disillusioned with where the Conservative Party even is. And if they can do that and connect back with them, it might win them a few votes. We're a long way off knowing where will be the general election next year, but this could be a step in the right direction for them.
Very interesting. Do you think Labour will change its position?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Again, the thing with the Labour Party is that, they're all for the net zero, all for the green, but they're all for imposing it on people, without listening to what the people actually want to say, essentially.
Do you think they'll change their mind? They basically have turned around. I mean, some of them have turned around and literally blamed Sadiq Khan for
that's the thing. That's the thing.
But they have, and some of them have some of them have actually said this week that it wasn't because the policy was wrong, it was that people didn't understand and they just needed it explained.
I think people understood they were being fined.
That is so patronising as well, and that's what we see time and time again from the Labour Party, is that, people don't know what they really want, or people aren't smart enough to get what we're trying to do. It's like, no, people just don't like it. That's it.
I think that's very fair. Interestingly, in terms of the political shift, and make no mistake, actually, the polls are all over the shop. And I was just looking at the latest poll this morning. Labour is down this morning. Conservatives are down, as you would expect. Interestingly, the two parties that are up, this is according to Britain Elect's poll, the Lib Dems have gone up +2, Reform UK up +2, Greens down as well by 1 point. So we're seeing enormous political shifts going on. Whether that continues remains to be seen. What I find interesting, when you look at Spain, and Renée and I were talking about this, Spaniards are going to the polls actually today, actually.
Snap election.
This snap election that's been called. And Spain, remember, was a dictatorship under Franco, I think, till 1977, and has been really left-wing ever since it reformed and became a democracy. We're now seeing, and I think this is what's going to happen, you're going to have a centre-right party, the PP, joining with an ultra-right-wing party, Vox, and we are seeing this shift towards right-wing politics across Europe. There's a map Renée showed me this morning where we've seen all of these countries becoming more right-wing. Is that going to happen here?
I'm not sure about if it's going to happen here. We're definitely seeing this trend happen across Europe right now. We saw it in Italy first, really. Finland just last month as well. They got in, their far-right party essentially got in on the promise of anti-immigration, less immigration, an anti-EU agenda. And I think that what we're seeing generally is this people moving to the more extreme sides of parties because they want change so much that they are just not getting from the conventional parties. Like I was mentioning earlier, so much is happening right now in terms of war in Ukraine, inflation, the economy, things people really care about, and nothing's changing, nothing's happening. And so they're feeling they need to go out to these further parties to really see change.
So do you see this, Grace, your view on this, is this, as Lettice says, a backlash against major political parties? Interestingly, in Spain, and I'm quoting here, they say it's a vote against woke policies.
Yeah, I've just absolutely got to echo what Lettice said here. Like, when the government, when the people in charge refuse to listen to the people that they are supposed to represent, what you will inevitably see time and time again is people rebelling against that. People will absolutely push against an establishment that they feel is imposing itself on them. So we might even see it here in the UK. I mean, we are pretty certainly heading towards a Labour government. Well, everything's up in the air. But when you actually talk to people, they say, I'm sick of this, I'm tired of this, our services aren't working, I'm paying all this tax, but I'm not seeing anything from it. So it's a sense of frustration that you feel within the people.
It is. I think the Lib Dems are actually doing well. Obviously I spoke to Daisy Cooper, the deputy leader of the Lib Dems, and she said the Lib Dems are back. Can you extrapolate? Do you think that actually that was a protest vote, or do you think actually this is the time for the Lib Dems?
I mean, the Lib Dems won in Somerset, and they'd held that particular seat for about 18 years, I think, before the Conservative MP came in for a short. So them winning that back, it is great for them, and they won it back. I'm not sure we're going to suddenly see the Lib Dems become a major political party here in the UK. I think that...
And why is that? Is that because of our electoral system, or is it because...
I think it is partially because of the electoral system and where you can be placing MPs to sit, or candidates to sit more. But I think it's also partially that a lot of the policies that Lib Dems might be saying sort of are crossing over with Conservative policies, and as have a big party there and where they might be going there. I think it's more about... that we do have a two-party system, essentially, and I think it's very difficult to try and change that.
I mean, it was interesting. Daisy Cooper said to me that actually she thinks Labour, going back to your point, that the Labour Party may well be the biggest party, but may well not have a majority government, and therefore have to rely on them, and the price of that is PR.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, because then suddenly everything is to play for smaller parties.
And it could be a price worth paying, couldn't it? If we're so frustrated with the two-party system as a people, and the only way out of it is PR, then we might have to suck up the pain of a Labour government for 5 years.
Or indeed, you might be very happy about that, depending on how you vote. I'll just put that out there. Let's move on to this story, which is in the Daily Mail, actually. Gay and transgender students are being offered their own halls in at least 7 universities across the UK for courses starting in September. I was very shocked by that. So they are basically, these 7 institutions have flats or accommodation blocks reserved only for LGBTQ+ undergraduates. Many people are saying that actually, as a result of this, there are unfilled rooms because, of course, if you assign whole accommodation blocks to LGBTQ+ people, then surely you will always then end up with discrepancy in housing. Also, is this the right policy?
No, absolutely not. There is no world in which segregating anyone based on their sexual orientation, their gender, their race, religion works. Where have we ever seen that work? And it's only going to deepen the divide between people and make people more ignorant to these sort of groups and these sort of differences between people.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. It is actually basically putting people in a hall of residence based on their sexuality, and you would never do that with race.
And my thing on this is that, I mean, through all the articles I've read, who actually asked for this policy? Because it's not the student voice that's pushing this. It's that these universities decided, as sort of the harbinger of, like,
I think that's a really interesting point. And where this comes from is that all of these institutions are signed up to Stonewall's Champions League, and they get more points if they do things like this. The weird thing about this is that Stonewall and the LGBTQ+ community are arguing for inclusion. That's the whole basis.
Exclusion.
Not exclusion.
Also, if you are a gay person, do you really want to be living in a hall of residence with only gay people?
Like, instead of, again, as you said, championing for inclusion, making sure that the halls that are already there are safer for individuals who are LGBTQ, you decide putting them into one corner, like some dark, dingy
with a big
corner,
sign,
exactly, saying all gay people, like that's ridiculous. It's insanity. I don't know.
I'm glad we all agree on that. Actually, Kate Barker of gay rights charity LGBT Alliance said this is wrong. Learning to live alongside people from different backgrounds with different outlooks is one of the most important lessons of university.
And surely students are probably the most accommodating and inclusive of all of people in society.
Also, and we've spoken about this before, sexuality isn't necessarily binary either, and it's really important that people understand each other the way they live. Anyway, let's move on. This is another story as well. This is about an unruly Jet 2 passenger, right? And apparently this was a flight which left from Edinburgh and it was going to Tenerife. It was forced to land on Porto Santo Island in Madeira, more than 300 miles away, because of the appalling behaviour of this 26-year-old man. And he was tasered on the plane, dragged off the plane after his behaviour was so out of order on the plane. A second female passenger was also ejected off the plane. He was wrestling with the security staff. And apparently this also comes on the back of another incident where a passenger tried to open the door of the plane in mid-flight, and another one urinated on his brother on a plane.
I'm assuming lots of alcohol.
I was about to say,
so
I think alcohol-based.
It is, and so it goes back to, obviously, and this is the point, in an airport, I am amazed to see people drinking pints of beer at 3 in the morning.
Oh, what?
Okay, maybe you're not.
Well, I feel like at an airport there is no sort of time per se.
Okay.
Going for a pint when if you are going on holiday.
I can see your kind of
that's
holiday.
Sort of like, it's the start of a holiday, but there's a limit. I'm never going to be trying to open the plane door, for example.
So the question really, the reason I bring this up is what has happened to standards in public life?
Well, that definitely. Also, 300 miles away, was that really the nearest place that they could have had to
They
drop
probably
him
wanted
off?
it miles away from Tenerife.
But the problem, you're absolutely right, David. Your question is the right one. We have, as we discussed yesterday, lost standards where you respect other people around you. We have moved to a me. I'm the most important person and I can do whatever I want. Well, you know what? You can't, because you should have been taught by your parents to respect other people.
So, Grace, what do you make of this?
I'm just thinking of those poor other people on these flights having to witness all this.
And the delay was extraordinary. Well, I want to say something like 17 hours.
I think it was 27.
Was it 27?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
literally
ridiculous.
You work, you've got limited hours, limited days away.
You've lost a day and a half,
Shocking, absolutely shocking. I mean, personally, I'm far too stressed in an airport to...
Are you?
Far too, the boarding, the passport, all of that. Like, after the flight, sure.
I'm with Lettice. I'm a gin and tonic boy.
Really?
The minute I get to an airport.
Surprise.
But even if I'd had a cheeky drink or two, there's absolutely no way that I could ever even consider being that inebriated that you'd have to be tasered.
Also, it does strike me that using a taser on board a metal aircraft doesn't seem like a brilliant idea to me.
But anyway, they carry tasers with them on it.
Well, indeed. Let's move on. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on this one. This is about a festival about the 1975 singer Matty Healy. Now, they were performing in Malaysia, and in fact, the authorities cancelled a music festival after the lead singer of this indie band, the 1975, which I'm sure you're very aware of, kissed a male bandmate following an expletive-laden tirade against the country's anti-LGBT laws. So essentially, he was swigging from a bottle. He then called the laws banning homosexuality ridiculous and said the government were a bunch of retards.
Yeah.
And the question I have is, whilst I understand his sentiment, is it right for the band, to lecture the hosting country on how they conduct their business?
No, it's not. It's not at all. And like, we do not agree with what they may or may not have put into law, but ultimately it's their country. And no, it's never worked anywhere where you go somewhere and try and force your views on other people. And ultimately he chose to go there. He should have looked into it more clearly.
He took the money.
And he took the money.
He's doing it deliberately as an act of rebellion.
Well, that's the point, Grace. He says, I should have looked into it more before we went touring there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's no way that you lecture on LGBT laws and then, immediately after do something, you say, oh, whoops, it was an accident. Yeah. My thing is, again, I absolutely disagree with these laws, but you're in this country, and his actions, one, have repercussions for the LGBT community in this country, and also for other bands who, wanted to perform there.
And people who wanted to go to the festival, they were probably going to have a great weekend.
Thinking about no one but himself.
Yes, and people said it's a 3-day festival, and they bought tickets just to see this particular band, and the whole festival.
I think Grace's last sentence actually sums it up. He was thinking about no one but himself.
So that links back, doesn't it, to the Jet 2 incident, thinking only about yourself.
I think it was incredibly rude about the government. It wasn't, he went on this tirade and those words and the language that you use. You have to show respect to other people, like we were saying on the Jet 2.
If I go to Spain and I go into a cathedral, I cover my head. I'm not religious, but I do it out of respect because that's what
and that's very interesting in Spain as well. If you go into a shop, you put a shirt on, and I see people wandering in with their beer bellies hanging out. It's not it's just not appropriate. It's not appropriate. And just talking about standards in public life, and you can see there's a thread through this morning. Also, a new British medal is being launched to honour people who have responded to major disasters and emergencies, such as earthquakes and floods. This has been approved by the King himself. It's going to be called the Humanitarian Medal and will recognise the efforts of emergency workers and relief teams, including charities, service personnel and health workers. It will honour the unsung heroes in emergencies both abroad and in the UK, and this could be natural disasters, war zones, epidemics, and so on. Your thoughts?
I mean, lovely, to be honest. I think if people are putting their lives at risk, if they're helping in these terrible, tough times or situations that might be happening, then they do deserve to be praised and awarded. It's heroic. Some of these things are incredibly dangerous that they're putting themselves into for other people. And so, yeah, I do think that's...
Well, so the reason I find this particularly interesting is we've talked this morning about actually a sense of social justice, of actually putting back something into this country, any other country. Does this go some of the way for younger people, maybe, to be more involved in what they're doing, to actually think about other people?
Yeah, one, I have to absolutely echo what Lettice said, and also Renée mentioned something earlier, that society is moving towards a more individualistic way of things. It's all about me, me, me. So if we can have something that recognises people who, you know, sort of step out of that narrative and help their community around them actually, you know, make a difference, then obviously it's got to be celebrated. And again, definitely this trend is increasing more and more with young people. Like, again, don't even want to say his name, but people like Mizzy, these are the people that people are seeing on social media doing all sorts of things.
Up to.
Yeah, and thinking, okay, he's doing it, why can't I? So we need to have things in society that recognise people who do good for people around them.
What about another medal for community service?
I think that'd be an absolutely great idea. Because again, we can feel it. Like Renée said it, Leslie said it, that people are moving towards a way where they think, I'm the only person that really matters in my life, and you know, they see things around them and think that's not really relevant to me, and we need something that kind of bring society together again.
So it's about actually making sure that we lose the selfish society.
Yeah, definitely.
And the actions that benefit other people are actually good and meritful. You know, so that we don't just have people going through life ignoring old people in the supermarket, you know, throwing their rubbish on the floor because they don't care that it offends someone else. All of those things. It is, as you said, standards.
It is standards. Final word, Lettice.
Yeah. Well, no, I completely agree. It's, if you see someone getting this medal, it could just be a little girl who's cleaned up more in her street, you'll think twice. And it's about making people think twice that then really enacts the change.
Very interesting stuff. Thank you very much to both of you, to Lettice Bromovsky and also Grace Badamosi. And that was today's Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.